Howdy guys, and welcome to my channel. My name's Don, and today I want to talk about what some people consider to be the greatest bass fisherman that ever lived. And no, I'm not talking about Buck Perry. I'll probably talk about him in another video. This is about somebody you've probably never heard of. It's an interesting story in that took a lot of research to find out about this guy. But his name is uh, Glen Andrews. And even though you may have never heard of him, uh, I heard about him almost by accident. Just talking with some guys one day, and somebody mentioned his name, and I thought, well, I follow this pretty good, and I never heard of him. And even if he went way back into the late 60s or mid 60s, late 60s, early 70s, I would have thought that if he was considered one of the best bass fishermen that ever lived, that I probably would have heard of him, but I'd never heard of him. So anyway, I did some research and I found out that there was actually a book written about him, and the book's very, very hard to find. It was actually written by his son, uh, D. Shane Andrews, and in conjunction with Jeremy Miller. And apparently it's out of print, so it's a very difficult book to find. I did find a copy, and it's called, The Impossible Cast. It's an interesting story. Try to get it in focus here. Um, if you can find this book, very interesting reading. And it kind of goes back to really before Ray Scott, before BASS, before a lot of the most commonly known or more commonly known bass fishing really happened in this country. A lot of people think Ray Scott started it all. He really didn't. He did accomplish a lot of things, but he wasn't the first guy to ever have a bass tournament. There were bass tournaments being held in different states, particularly Florida and Texas. And these tournaments typically included various types of fish, not just bass, and often didn't have any limits. Sometimes were over a period of days. So the concept, of bass fishing tournaments wasn't necessarily new. It wasn't until really uh, when Ray Scott came along and said, okay, let's just confine it to largemouth bass, and then eventually it was limiting the number of fish that you could actually weigh in, and then finally it was, getting over that hump of where they were actually killing all the fish, and there was a little bit of a public outcry, and you know, Ray Scott kind of had a brainstorm when he came up with live release. Had it not been for that, I think the Bass Angler Sportsman Society would have just folded its doors. But anyway, going back to Glen Andrews, Glenn accomplished a lot of things back again in the day before Ray Scott and his bass tournaments, and I want to just touch on a few of those things. And unfortunately, I have to wear some glasses so I can see. But in 1962, 1963, 1965, he was the Missouri state champion. In 1965, he was the Arkansas state champion. In 1962 and 1963, he actually fished the World Series of Sports Fishing, and he was the runner-up. In 1965 and 66, he finished it. He fished it once again, and he won it. Uh, so he was an innovative lure manufacturer. He was an acclaimed outdoor writer. Uh, he had accomplished so many things, and at one point he just kind of dropped off and stopped fishing. Some of that had to do with the fact that there were a lot of guys that didn't like him. There were a lot of people that kind of sabotaged his efforts. Some of the guys that were running the tournaments felt like less people would enter the tournaments if they knew that Glen Andrews was going to be fishing. But through it all, he kind of persevered, and he was literally untouchable. Nobody could beat him. If you entered a tournament back in those days and you thought there was a chance of beating Glen Andrews, you'd have been sadly mistaken. So unfortunately, it didn't really click. It didn't really connect with a lot of people. And, even some of the top pros, you talk to guys like Bill Dance and Roland Martin and Ricky Clunn. You ask them if they've ever heard of Glen Andrews, and they may have, but if they did, it was probably only something that they read or just happened to hear about. They probably weren't that familiar with him because it was really before their time. He was acclaimed by Ray Scott. Ray interviewed him and talked with him a number of times. He was actually the inspiration for some of the things that Ray Scott did. And like I say, unfortunately, the book is out of print. It took me months to find the book, and when I did, it was actually in a bookstore, and they had a price of $60 on it. That's a lot of money for a book, at least in my opinion. I had to think about that for a while, but I finally forked it over and bought the book, and I have to tell you, it's a big part of my lure collection now because of its rarity. And I don't know if I would agree he was the best fisherman that ever lived. Certainly that was the claim that his son made. But if you think back and you go back to the early 60s as he was as known all the way back, really to the beginning of 1960 when he was winning everything that he entered. You got to give the man credit. He was accomplishing things no one else could accomplish. He was doing it with what we would consider to be antique or even archaic equipment, and nobody was even close to it. The book is filled with articles about the different tournaments that he fished, how a number of times he was literally sabotaged by some of the things that took place. And he was also banned from some of the tournaments because his record would have been even more impressive. But they found different ways they could just ban him or keep him from fishing the tournaments. And even though he fought, for his right to be able to fish, they found little reasons that they could disqualify him. So you got to give the man credit. He accomplished quite a bit. And he accomplished it a long, long time ago. So anyway, if anybody ever mentions to you that they heard about or read about the greatest bass fisherman that ever lived, and they start going off on a tangent about one guy or another, remind them that truly, at one point, the guy that was considered the best ever, the greatest bass fisherman that ever lived, not fisherman, bass fisherman that ever lived. His name was Glen Andrews, and you heard it here. If you can find this book, by all means, pick it up. You'll enjoy it at whatever cost it might be. But I can assure you, I have looked and looked, and I'd love to buy another copy, but I can't find one anywhere. So thanks for tuning in. Just wanted to share this with you. Happened to notice this book in my room full of antique fishing lures and fishing equipment, and thought might make for kind of an interesting video. So thanks for tuning in. Click that little button on the bottom. Subscribe to my channel. And again, if you have any thoughts, maybe you know somebody that you consider to be the greatest fisherman in the world, let me know what you think. I'll be happy to respond to you. Thanks again.